Look at the Mediterranean in the year 555. By every visible metric, this is a world perfectly restored. The cities are gleaming, the trade routes are humming, and the Roman Empire, which was supposed to have fallen nearly a century earlier, is once again the undisputed superpower of the West. This massive expansion was engineered by one man, Emperor Justinian. He spent his reign aggressively reclaiming the lost territories of North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain. He backed up that military might with cultural dominance. He ordered the complete reorganization of centuries of contradictory Roman laws into a single, unified legal code, creating a framework that organized life from the borders of Persia to the coast of the Atlantic. Geographically and culturally, this was the absolute zenith of the state. He had built a restored empire that looked invulnerable. This graph tracks the imperial treasury reserves across his reign. The moment Justinian dies, the wealth plummets to zero. The state is entirely bankrupt. The rulers who immediately followed him were left scrambling to keep the administration functioning. Emperor Maurice was so strapped for cash that he ordered his troops to spend the freezing winter on the hostile side of the Danube River, simply to save money on their basic food rations. Which raises a rather glaring question. How exactly does an empire that controls the richest, most productive agricultural lands on the planet completely run out of money in a single lifetime? We tend to measure historical success by looking at the maximum extent of colored lines on a map. But states do not run on land, they run on cash. To understand how Justinian emptied the treasury, we first have to look at how full it was when he took the throne. He inherited an absolute fortune from his predecessors. These earlier rulers operated essentially as chief accountants. Emperors like Marcian focused purely on financial stabilization. They slashed oppressive property taxes that were crippling the middle class and aggressively trimmed the bloated state bureaucracy. More importantly, Marcian practiced strict geopolitical restraint. He flatly refused to pay extortionate tribute money to the Huns, and he kept his army at home instead of launching expensive foreign wars. By hoarding revenue and limiting expenses, they built a massive treasury surplus that inoculated the state against collapse. Justinian, however, treated that surplus as an unlimited checking account. He poured vast amounts of state capital into domestic building projects, culminating in the Hagia Sophia, a cathedral so large and complex that its construction costs defy modern calculation. To keep his eastern flank secure while he built churches and invaded the West, he resorted to massive geopolitical bribery. He paid literal tons of gold to the rival Sassanid Persian Empire just to maintain a fragile, temporary truce. Then there were his famous Western conquests. Taking back the Italian peninsula was not a profitable enterprise. It required a decade of brutal, constant warfare that burned the region to the ground, thoroughly destroying the very agricultural tax base he was trying to reclaim. Through beautiful buildings and vast territorial gains, Justinian took a highly efficient, sustainable economic engine and converted it into an impossibly expensive liability. And then, that overextended system hit a brick wall. A completely unexpected biological disaster, now known as the Plague of Justinian. The pathogen swept through the Mediterranean trading ports and into the agricultural heartlands. Before it subsided, the disease wiped out an estimated 30% of the empire's total population. This visual illustrates what we can call the pre-modern economic trap. In a medieval state, revenue is tied directly to the harvest. The state's income is a math equation based strictly on the number of living, working farmers. When a third of the taxpayers died, revenue vanished with them. But the cost of maintaining newly conquered borders, soldiers, and the sprawling bureaucracy remained completely inflexible. That combination of rigid imperial spending and a crippled tax base locked the Byzantine state into an inescapable deficit. On paper, the map of the empire looked as glorious as in antiquity. In reality, it was a hollowed-out shell running on fumes. Because the treasury was drained and the military was stretched to its absolute breaking point, the state was left utterly defenseless against the aggressive new neighbors that would arrive in the following decades, including the Lombards in Italy and the rapid Arab expansion in the east. In his relentless drive to restore the ancient borders of Rome, Justinian had drained the very resources required to protect them, paving the way for those newly expanded borders to collapse entirely. The Byzantine Empire would go on to survive for another 1,000 years, but it did so in spite of Justinian's conquests, not because of them. The true architects of Byzantine longevity were the unglamorous administrators who followed him. They understood that retreating, consolidating their territory, and meticulously balancing the budget were the only ways to keep the state alive. History books will always glorify the sword and the map, but an empire is only ever sustained by the